Hey everyone, it's Natalie Bencavanga, and welcome to Facts Over Fear. You guys, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation because you know how passionate I am about disability justice. And July is Disability Justice Awareness Month. But this year's conversation, we're not just going to be talking about celebrating the progress. We're going to be asking whether or not that progress is now at risk. Because for the past several months, disability advocates have been raising the alarm over a series of actions by the current Trump administration that they say could really weaken civil rights protections, reducing access to services and reshaping how the federal government defines its responsibility to people with disabilities. We've talked about this from cuts to Medicaid, to environmental issues, to the way we don't protect ourselves in community spaces against airborne viruses. All of these things are interconnected. Now, supporters argue that these changes are about reducing bureaucracy and increasing efficiency, but critics are saying that it's merely laying the groundwork to roll back decades of hard-fought protections. And my gosh, were they ever hard-fought. So what's really happening here? And what does it mean for the millions of Americans who live every day with disabilities, invisible or visible, and their families and their caretakers and their friends? So joining us today is Casey Doherty. She is from the Center for American Progress Disability Justice Initiative. She's a policy analyst. Casey, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation.
I'm really excited for our conversation too. And I have to say, it's always great to connect with someone who really walks the walk of what they're doing. And you and I connected on LinkedIn right before the show. And I was like, she's wearing a mask because I still mask very much in public. Everybody here that watches the show regularly knows how fervent I am about COVID protection. Can you just talk a little bit before we dive in around the connection around being COVID conscious, still masking in public, and how that connects back to the larger work of disability justice?
Yeah, I would love to. I'll start first for folks who are tuning in. My name is Casey. Quick visual description. I'm a white woman with darkish blonde, longish hair. I'm wearing a black tank top and I'm wearing some gold earrings. And yeah, I have been COVID cautious since the beginning. My disabilities worsened significantly after a COVID infection. So I was no stranger before that to pain and fatigue. It is now significantly worse. But I don't think you have to go through that to care about protecting yourself and others. And I'll say too, it's nuanced because being disabled is something that I am incredibly proud of, and I'm excited to talk about Disability Pride Month. But it is also important to not further harm or disable people, through passing preventable viruses. And so I think living the values and principles of disability justice that we'll talk about in a little bit, that includes, cleaning the air, doing your part. If you're able to wear a mask, I'm able to wear one. I can afford to buy a mask, and I will continue to wear one to protect myself and others, especially because so many COVID cases and other viruses are often asymptomatic. So you have it before you know it. And so I think it's really important just to practice harm reduction. And I think the act of masking is a really radical and kind act of community care. And you see that in, I was telling Natalie before we jumped on that I was in a bookstore. I'm mostly housebound because of my energy limiting disabilities, but I'll occasionally go out in public in my mask. And I had someone come up to me who was wearing the same N95 or a mask that I was wearing. And it was just such a beautiful moment of recognition that you're just trying to do your small part. And then that's really all we can do.
No, I so appreciate your vulnerability and honesty around your situation and why you continue to mask. I'll say I am not disabled, but I stand in solidarity with the disabled communities, with all marginalized communities. And you're one infection away from becoming disabled. Long COVID is impacting millions of Americans. It's impacting our economy. So I continue to mask because of exactly what you said. You just don't know who you might be around that could be vulnerable to something. And I myself, I'm good. I don't need to get sick repeatedly, and I don't need to get proof of how bad things can get,
Yeah.
especially in a country that does not have universal health care or universal paid leave. So
Yep.
that's our little COVID cautious awareness moment at the top of the show. And now
Yeah.
I'd like to really dig into some of the content that I wanted to talk about further today, because while I said earlier that July is Disability Justice Awareness Month, many Americans, I think, are far more familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act than the concept of disability justice itself. So, can you talk a little bit about that nuanced difference between disability justice and how that really differs from disability rights?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I'll say too, I think about this a lot because, as Natalie shared, I work at the Center for American Progress, and our team is called the Disability Justice Initiative. So, very important to us that we're practicing the principles that we're named after. And so, I'll explain this fairly briefly. Happy to go into it more, but I really encourage folks to check out readings on this. There's a lot of just disability justice work by disabled people of color out there. So, really I know you'll probably put some links later that folks can check out. So basically, disability rights, you mentioned the Americans with Disabilities Act. So disability rights focuses on kind of the laws and structures that work to prevent discrimination and ensure access. So the one that comes up most for people is the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's also Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act is another big one. Essentially, it's working within the current system of government and other structures is what disability rights is. Now, disability justice is basically understanding that there's a lot that's still not being captured by disability rights, especially because, disability rights has been pretty focused on white folks, on folks with mobility disabilities, and not really the full expanse of the disability experience, which is so multifaceted and intersectional. And so, disability justice is an intersectional framework and movement created by disabled LGBTQI plus people of color. And it fights to redesign like entire systems so no body mind is left behind. And knowing that, the government and laws are not set up to help us and help us thrive. And so I encourage folks to check out the 10 principles of disability justice created by a collective called Sins Invalid. And they include, you may have heard of some of these, but intersectionality, leadership of the most impacted, collective liberation, commitment to cross disability solidarity. That's a few that I think of a lot because I think they really get to the core of what's trying to happen here, which is always back to intersectionality, always back to focusing on the most marginalized in our community, because we know that laws and government and Supreme Court cases are not always going to be serving folks, of various communities. And so I think of disability justice as a fight not for individual inclusion, but a fight for that so that all of us can survive and thrive.
I love that. It's so interesting, Casey, because one of my friends, Heather Tomko, she uses like a motorized chair
Mhm.
to move around, and she had done this thing in Pittsburgh, where I'm based, and it was a bar crawl for disabled people. And I said to her, I was like, "Oh, well, I'll come on this bar crawl with you. Like, this sounds like a good time." And I got to tell you how shocked I was at how limited this experience truly was in terms of locations that we could enter, because I
Mhm.
didn't understand that a chair, it only needs to be this much sidewalk, this
Yeah.
much of a step, where
Yep.
you can't even enter the space. Even if I'm like, oh, well, it's on the first floor, this will be fine. And I was like, this is not going to be fine. These ideas that I think if you are a abled person in that way, that they don't even cross your mind. So when we're talking about these ideas like inclusion and collective liberation, how do you pull people in that this just isn't at the forefront of their existence, or that they don't know that many people who perhaps have a visible
Mhm.
disability? Because I do think a lot of people you probably know do have a disability, but they don't talk about it, or perhaps you don't interact with them in a way where it would be noticed?
Yeah, it's a good point. So, and I'm a person with mostly what would be considered invisible or non-apparent disabilities, which kind of a questionable term, but you know, I it's important, and to your point, pretty much everybody does know a disabled person if you
Mhm,
actually think about it, and at least 1 in 4 Americans has a disability. That's likely a vast undercount,
mhm,
because people are not always going to self-disclose or things like that. So it's interesting because you often hear people saying that, like, temporarily able-bodied people, which
mhm.
if you live long enough or just over the course of your life, you'll develop a disability. So that's why you should care. And I think there's some merit to that argument. But I actually think, like, you should just care because people are people and, like, members of your community just exist and deserve access to every part of life. So I would say it's just, like, literally down to human interaction. Like, disability is a part of the life course. You may experience it. You'll almost definitely know and love someone who experiences disability, however it looks in that
Mhm.
person's body mind. Um, and so, yeah, it's a hard argument, and I think people take kind of different tacks. But to me, it's like literally just, are you a good human being and do you care that other people are able to access what you're able to access? And that's, like things like education and work, but it's also hobbies and friends and dating and, like, everything that makes a meaningful life.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's calling people in without, I don't really believe in, like, threatening that, like, one day you'll be disabled, so you
Sure.
need to join the fight now. I think it's that we need to all fight together. And I'm glad you brought up, like, 1 inch raised sidewalk is enough to limit access. I don't know if you've heard of, like, the curb cut effect, or folks in the
Mhm.
community have. It's basically, there's a lot of things that were created for disabled people are accessibility measures that serve the entire public. So a curb cut is one of them, where parents use it for strollers. People
Mhm.
maybe have a grocery cart and, like, they're riding a skateboard, they're on a bike. There's a million reasons you would use a curb cut beyond being a wheelchair user, using a
Mhm.
scooter. And so I think that's a good example where things in your life that help you every day, you might not think about it, were fought for by the disability community for everyone.
Mm.
Um, and so I think taking a step back and thinking about those things that folks take for granted that were very hard fought, I think is a really worthwhile exercise to take.
And that's a excellent point. I want to elaborate on these things that have been hard fought, because a lot of them right now, I feel, are in jeopardy. So, what is something that you, as an advocate in this space, concerns you around what we're potentially losing, the gains that could now be vulnerable? Because what I find so fascinating about disability justice is there's no way to talk about it without talking about the environment, without talking about race, without
Yep.
talking about labor, all of these, marriage equality. Like, there's so many things that intersect within this community, to your point, how it touches so many lives. But what is very concerning to you right now that you're worried about it, like the forefront of your mind?
Yeah. So I think the point I'd like to make is that it's not just one thing. The concern of the
Mhm.
disability community right now is the cumulative effect,
Mm,
not any one policy. And that's, policy is so personal. Like, I spend kind of all my time. I'm also a PhD student looking at researching disability policy. So I literally do it all the time. And I know that it's not just, okay, the government said this and we can forget about it, right? Like, maybe there's
right.
a news story. It is everyday life for every disabled person.
Mm,
And so it's the constant hits of policy change after policy change, that, and it's Disability Pride Month this month. So I feel like I'm reflecting a lot on, as we've talked about, the hard fought wins. For example, end of July we'll celebrate the 36th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the
mm,
ADA. I'm 28. I've never known a life without the ADA. It's made
Yeah.
it so I can access work, school, community life, hobbies. We have mandates that disabled people can live and work and do things in their communities. And that did not always exist.
Yeah.
For most of history, disabled people have been shut away, institutionalized, segregated. And so that is what we're concerned about is the cumulative effect of policy change. And I can get into a few that we're particularly concerned about at this moment.
Mhm.
But what that's doing is that's bringing up the fears of decades and decades of harm, that the
Yeah.
disability community has faced. And so that coordinated attack is what we're really paying attention to. Um, and here at the Center for American Progress, we spent a bit of last summer. At that point, it had been the first 6 months of the second Trump administration. And we noticed that there's and it's like a political tactic, like the shock and awe of you just hit people with a million policy changes, a million executive orders, and they're not going to know what to do with that. And things are going to fall kind of under the radar. That is not the case for the disability community because we're living it every day. So things
Mm.
are not going quietly. And so it's especially important to catalog and explain all those things so that we can show that it is a coordinated attack. And so hopefully, readers can be and viewers can be directed to this piece we put out last summer called The Trump Administration's War on Disability. And we go through kind of a lot of different topic areas from public health to education to employment, where the federal government was attacking disability policy and protections and civil rights in all of these different topic areas that fall under disability policy, which the point I like to make is that's everything, right? Because the disability community is everywhere. So
Mm.
every policy is affecting us. And so I will say, so right before Disability Pride Month, July, what I kind of want to really break down for viewers today is something we're very concerned about, which is a memo from the Department of Justice that was released a few weeks ago. Um, Folks may have seen some news articles about this. We are extremely concerned because it's attacking like a core principle of disability policy and civil rights. And I can explain this a little because I think there is some challenge, because a lot of these things, a lot of the harm is purposefully hidden under legalese and policy language. And, it's released on a Friday at 7 p.m.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean it's not going to harm people. And so it's important. I definitely don't think people need to watch the news at all times. I actually probably would disagree with that. But I think people who are tuned into policy a lot, it is it is our duty to purposefully break down these topics that are hard to understand, and that's by design that they're hard to understand. And so I'm here today to explain one of these things. So this memo is not an obscure legal memo. It's basically about whether disabled people will continue to have the right to live in their homes and communities instead of being forced into institutions as disabled people were for, so long. And for more than 25 years, disability rights law has been understood to require states to provide services in the most integrated community-based setting possible,
Mhm.
often at home. So basically, if someone can live in their home with the right supports, they should never be forced into a nursing home, psychiatric institution, or another segregated setting. And this is based around the experiences of real people. It's a 1999 Supreme Court decision called Olmstead. Um,
Mhm.
Folks in the community probably have heard, we talk about Olmstead a lot because it's so foundational to our rights as a community. And it centered on two disabled women who were ready to leave a psychiatric institution, hospital, and their doctors agreed that they could live successfully in the community, but they weren't allowed to leave.
Mm.
And so the Supreme Court did rule that segregating disabled people in institutions is discrimination. And that has been the bedrock that was issued the year after I was born, and that's all I've ever known, right? Like, that's the ADA, Olmstead, Section 504. These are the core tenets of
Mm.
disability civil rights. And it transformed disability policy by saying that disability services are to be provided in the most integrated setting possible. And what that means is people living in their homes, in their communities, kids can go to their neighborhood school, people can work and volunteer and raise their family, vote in their community, all of these things. That again, we go back to like people taking for granted, right? That was not offered to many disabled people, all those aspects of life. And so what we're very concerned about is this memo comes out from the Department of Justice arguing that the foundational civil rights laws do not actually require
Mm.
uh, that you know integration and community living is a right that is afforded to us, and that that long-standing interpretation set in 1999 actually like wasn't right.
Mm.
Now, I do think it's important because that is very people have been understandably like extremely emotional and extremely scared because that is attacking, like I said, just a bedrock of our civil rights.
Yeah.
But I will say for folks tuning in, this memo itself does not
Mm-hmm.
repeal ADA or overturn Olmstead, the Supreme Court decision, but it does signal that the
Mm-hmm.
federal government, which is the nation's primary enforcer of disability rights and civil rights,
Right.
may no longer,
Or it used to be.
or used to,
Should
uh,
be. Or
they
what is the government for, right?
uh, that could be a whole nother.
Oh, it will be. I'm already making notes for our next conversation.
But so the scare for us is, will they no longer enforce one of the disability community's
Yeah.
most important civil rights protections? And that's why disability advocates are sounding the alarm. Um, and like, now we have to see how the Department of Justice intends to interpret this
Mm.
going forward, and also how states will interpret it. And that's what brings this to the broader context, is that this is not happening in a vacuum.
Right.
It's happening also amidst massive Medicaid cuts, which is often what pays for home and community-based services to allow folks to remain in their home, in their community. And so if states no longer believe they have a federal obligation or any enforcement from the federal government to provide those services, and they believe the federal government won't challenge that, we could see more people ending up in nursing homes, in institutions, and basically like forcing them to disappear,
Mm.
because the federal government has unilaterally decided that that's no longer our civil right. But people don't suddenly stop needing support, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry, that was long.
No. I got to tell you, I don't know why, but this conversation's making me very emotional because I don't love this idea that people need to hide who they are or that they're sequestered or forced out of public life
Mhm.
because they don't fit this mold of
Yep.
what they are supposed to be. And I would be remiss if I didn't connect some dots here because that's what I try to do on Facts Over Fear. But guys, the rise of fascism and the rise of eugenics, they go hand in hand. That's why I'm constantly talking about masking as a form of resistance, why we have to stand in solidarity with the disabled communities, because these things may start with the most vulnerable. They pluck you off one at a time, one group at the time on the edges of survival, but they're not going to stop there. And we're already witnessing that in so many ways. These Medicaid cuts, it was like that had to happen first. All of this is very much connected back to Project 2025, and it's all very much connected back to this idea of the worthy versus the unworthy, which I used to, in my previous life, I have my master's in social work. And so I've worked with a lot of different communities. Um, and that was a core tenet of a belief that I had as I stepped out of that space and into journalism full time. It's not what people deserve, right? Because that is subjective. This idea of who deserves help, who
Yeah.
deserves support, right?
Yep.
but who do we want to be as a collective?
Mhm.
And to me, that is the philosophical question that the United States is sort of being forced to grapple with in this moment in our history, because we have kicked that can for a really long time down the road. And we're now at the edge. We're staring down the barrel of a gun. Fascism is in our faces, right? And who do we want to be? And so, as we wrap up this conversation today, and I'd love to have you back, because, like I said, I feel like we just scratched the
I'd
surface.
love to chat Project 2025, not to derail, but kind of outside of work, I've done a lot of work on how the disability community is responding and like organizing against Project 2025. So would love to chat that
Oh,
at time.
consider it done. Everybody here is watching, and this will be played back many spaces later. Consider it done. The
I,
whole reason I reached out to you guys was because of that memo that you shared.
yep,
So I'm very glad that we were able to spend some time breaking that down, because I did a video on that when it first happened, and people had extremely strong responses in support of disability justice. And I
yeah,
think that's really important here, Casey, is remembering that people do care and people are waking up, and the more education that people like you can provide in spaces like this and independent media, the more we can get to communities, because once people hear something, most people go, I don't agree with that. I need to
yeah,
stand with my family, with my community. So
for sure.
in the spirit of that, I wanted to get your thoughts around the future, because
Mhm.
it's very easy to sit in this sense of dread, impending doom, because
Yeah,
there is so much coming at us, right?
sure.
But we all can't do everything. And so I feel like, someone like you're in a very specific lane, but it also has incredibly broad scope, right? Where it's like you're working in this space, but the implications of that work are huge. So, as we're looking to the future, what do you want people to understand about how their fate and the fate of the disability communities are intertwined?
Oh, I mean, I think it just goes back. I think I said towards the top of the call, like disability policy is everything. So it is affecting everyone, right? It's education policy, it's employment, it's labor, it's community living, housing, environmental justice, racial justice. And that's actually maybe the point I would make is disability justice is environmental justice, is racial justice, is trans justice. You
Mm,
go on and on. And so there's no purposefully under the principles of disability justice, there's no separating between movements. There's cross disability solidarity and cross movement solidarity. So it's all the same fight. And I think that that's a really important thing to remember is that those who seek to harm us and eliminate our communities wants us to be divided. And so it's like, well, that's
mm,
that's only going to affect those disabled people, right? But it's like, well, that's pretty much everybody. And, the intersectionality of everyone's identity and every community means that everyone's going to be affected by these changes. And so I think those are some really important things to remember is that resisting is literally as simple as being in community, practicing community care, investing in mutual aid, masking if you can. There are things, it doesn't have to be this huge act,
mm.
right? And I do a lot of thinking as a person who spent many years bedbound, now mostly housebound because of my energy limiting disabilities. Like, there's a ton you can do from home too. It's not always going out and like being a traditional kind of march in the street or protest. There's a lot of protest and fighting back that can be done in any format.
Mm.
Would love to come back and talk about that too. But so I think we do a lot of thinking about how you weigh. I'm not a sports person, but like playing defense and then also thinking about fighting for a better world.
Mm.
And I think you have to try to strike that balance because if it's all playing defense, it feels so heavy.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to hold that heaviness and like it's just important because we have to fight back. But we also have to consider the world that we want to create because simply playing defense on structures and systems and laws that weren't fully accessible to us in the first place, I don't think is the right strategy. And that's basically what disability justice is also saying is what can we rebuild? What can we remake together? And
Mm.
so that's what I try to do is like think about how to hold those two things at once.
I love that. You guys, there really is safety in numbers. So the more of us that stand with one another, the stronger we really are as a community and as a country. Casey, thank you so much for being in conversation with me today. If people want to learn more, please let me know. Where can they go?
Yeah, well, you can look us up at the Disability Justice Initiative at the Center for American Progress. We have quite a few resources. One, like I mentioned, the Trump administration's war on disability, but we cover a wide variety because disability policy is everything. So you'll learn about Medicaid. You'll learn about, we didn't get to talk in this conversation, but about how the federal government is trying to move any special education programs to the Department of Health and Human Services. That's a major
Mhm.
concern. So yeah, come learn from us. And then also hopefully you'll check out, the 10 principles of disability justice and then some other readings that, dive into that a little deeper. There's a lot of resources out there. So I'm excited to share more.
Oh, thank you so much, Casey. I can't wait to have you back. Like I said, we just scratched the surface today, but I think the conversation we had around the memo was very timely and important. And I appreciate your insights on that and everything else that you shared today. And thanks to everyone who tuned in. If you came late, don't worry. This is going to be up on YouTube, Substack, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the
Everywhere.
places and spaces. And please make sure to subscribe to Facts Over Fear. Share this if you can so we can reach as many people as possible. And until next time, everyone, as always, take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks again, Casey.
Thank you.